Cypress, a retired. Oops. Oh, I forgot to say we're being recorded, sorry. Penny Cypress, a retired pediatric occupational therapist. So we want to thank you for participating this evening. And just as one small point of information before we start, we want to clarify that our OCFS training hours did not go through due to the timing requirements of OCFS documentation. But the CTLE credits are available. And if you're not registered through Frontline, please look at the information in the chat so that you can get the CTLE credits. CTLE stands for Continuing Teacher and Leader Education Credits, which if you're working towards any type of certification would be beneficial for you. So please put your name and email in the chat, or if you're uncomfortable doing that, make sure you send an email to Aaron Sorensen so that he can send you the certificate, and his email's listed in the chat. But that being said, we still have a wonderful evening focused on play, which is, as you know, near and dear to our hearts, and request your support regarding continued professional development on this topic. And we also have some wonderful door prizes, which will be raffled off at the end of our evening for those of you who are still participating. And our door prizes are sponsored through New York AEYC. And we have been able to get a one-year membership to NAEYC for a participant, a registration to the 2023 New York AEYC conference. And the third prize will be printed materials focused on play and developmentally appropriate practice. And you may know that there's a new DAP book out, so that would be very exciting for us to have that as well. So we're pretty excited about what we've been able to pull together. So we'll take some time to introduce ourselves. You've already heard that I'm Margaret Hoose. I'm a retired professor from SUNY Morrisville. I was the person for the early childhood program. I was the full-time person, and we had several other adjunct faculty, but I was the advisor, the professor, and the coordinator, so to speak. But I'm also an early childhood professional, a mother, and a grandmother. So I like those titles better. And we'll have Dr. Ann Fradkin Hayslip share with us a little bit about her, then Suzanne and Penny. So Dr. Ann, can you tell us?
Thank you. I'm Ann Hayslip, and I'm actually the facilitator right now for the early childhood education program within the School of Elementary Education and Reading at SUNY Oneonta. And my background is 20 plus years. I don't really want to say how many plus, but teaching everything from 3-year-olds in private schools to Head Start in some pretty rural areas, and then elementary years almost every year. I'm just really grateful that you invited me here, so thank you.
Suzanne, can you share with us a little bit?
Sure. Hi, my name is Suzanne Fine, and I teach at SUNY Cobleskill. And I've been here for a long time, since 1999. And prior to that, I taught in Vermont at a small college. And I have had a variety of experiences working with young children as well. I'm happy to be here. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you. And Penny, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I recently have retired, and I'm a grandma too, and that is really good, just saying. I worked in pediatric occupational therapy for 42 years. When I just got out of school I got out of school in 1979, just when the law for inclusion and for handicapped children to be included in education started. And then I have worked all through that process up to in 2000, when we were supposed to include those children in everything. And I've worked hard at doing that and including therapy in the classroom, which my therapy and my work as an occupational therapist is all about play. My children, my own grown children, used to say, "Mom plays all day." And that is what I used to do, with all my children. So that I worked with. And I brought a lot of that to the classroom as a method of education. So I'm hopeful that that perspective will work tonight.
That's pretty exciting for us to kind of have a perspective of a therapist and your insight. So I'm excited. As you can see, we have a diverse panel with a rich background in early childhood and a strong belief in play. So in planning this, we kind of thought that the structure of our evening would include the panelists answering some key questions that we developed through numerous conversations and talks with early childhood providers, educators, and students. We thought that if we allowed the presenters to talk and took notes on what they were saying, just simple little notes regarding what we find interesting, question, want to comment on, agree or disagree with, or even need clarification, that would ensure we address those questions and have time for rich small group discussions with some opportunity for closing comments after the presenters have shared their thoughts. So with that, we'd like to have our panel answer some key questions, move into our small group discussion, and then come back for a closure of what did we think in our small groups, what were some of the comments and suggestions for next steps, as far as if we were to pull together some other workshops on play, what would people want? And then make sure that we give away our prizes. So that's what we've got. So our first question, I'll ask Penny to start, and then the others can add anything that they might want to. But Penny, what we hear people say, well, what is play really? And what does it look like at different ages for children? Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts, and then we'll have the others share some things if they want?
I feel like play is generally learning through experience and experience within your environment. We as humans are naturally driven to do this activity called play. It's actually, as infants and young children, I believe that play is their work. I'm an occupational therapist who works with people on their daily life skills. Play is a child's daily life skills. That's how they learn, from their environment, from the people that are there, from the sensations that are there, from all that they run into. And so they're like a definition, a textbook definition might be that play is a range of intrinsically motivated activities done for recreation, pleasure, and enjoyment. And that's something, like, as adults, that's more of an adult look at play, but that same thing is true of babies. Like, as soon as they're born, they start to interact, and then they get feedback from interacting, and they make judgments based on that. Even as, just a brand new infant already recognizes the voices of the people that have been primary to them. And we know that because of all that neuroscience that they can do now. They didn't know it for sure when I first was going to work, but now they've proven it. And it's just amazing that already there's this basis for an exchange of information. I see something, I react to it, I pay attention to what happened. Play allows children to be able to use their creativity, or to use their creativity, or just interact with their environment while using all of their skills, their motor skills, their visual skills, their cognitive skills, their just everything that they have at use for them to interact. One of the most important parts, I think, of play is that it allows for independence. Like children don't have, well, they want to be independent really quick. I mean, like the first sentence that most children say is, I'll do it myself, or me. And through play, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to be in charge of what's happening if they're in charge of the play activity. So they develop their own capacity to make judgments and to learn from what they did, which I think is really important. Let's see. Another really important part of play is that it's kind of the first story. It's very literacy based when you think about it, because it's even, very young children, when they first do imitative play or pretend play, it's feeding the little pretend doll, or pretending to put mom and dad to bed, or making, it's making cookies with Play-Doh. And so there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like what we need for literacy, what we need for storytelling. And that's, and that I actually think storytelling is one of the most important parts in education, being able to have that memory to build and expand on what's going to happen in your world. That's, please add.
Anne, do you have any thoughts that you want to add to it?
I think Penny has done a great job. I would add to the experience, I would say it's about exploration, and it's about giving children the props if need be, and that might be even just the pots and pans in the kitchen. It might be the butterfly net going outside, or a paper bag to collect things. And along with that, I think it's just, again, it's giving children the experience. I sometimes wonder why classroom teachers in early childhood are not getting children outside. They sit inside and they talk about the weather, and I say, go outside, take that nature walk. So yes, I think it's experiential, but I think it's also about encouraging and facilitating.
Facilitating is certainly a really important part of it, and using props, or because we all, well, especially children, learn best by doing something. I think a lot of us grown-ups feel that same way, but little children, they interact and do and experience. And then a grown-up puts language to that experience. That puts the pieces together. I agree.
And I guess I would just add allowing them to touch. I mean, just, yes, here's a magnifying glass, and here are different things to touch and to smell, and just to, again, to be immersed sensory wise.
Suzanne, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to sort of reiterate what she just said about play. I have a quote here from Alliance for Childhood, which is a great resource for anybody who wants to look at or find some really great resources about play. Alliance for Childhood, it's based in Ithaca, New York. So in this quote, it says, trying to define play is like trying to define love. You can't do it. It's too big for that. So instead, we have to kind of think of play as a set of behaviors. And this is basically what we just heard, a set of behaviors that are freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated. So they're freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated. That's all I wanted to add. Yeah.
So if we think about that at different ages, obviously the child who is throwing something down as an infant and watching someone come and pick it up and give it back to them is playing and seeing their worlds of interaction Whereas then the child who moves towards peekaboo or slowly exploring other things and banging the pots and pans, that's all of their intrinsic motivation and their engagement. And then as they start to do some of the dramatization of their life, again, that's coming from them and their form of play of making sense of their world. So it's always interesting to look at what happens. But I think one of the most amazing things is that sometimes we forget that in early childhood, we consider it birth through 8, and those older children still need to play. And we may get into a little bit of that as far as what does that look like in a child's educational day? What does that look like in a child's family day and family week? When and how are they given that time to play and the freedom to play, perhaps in a way that's not structured by adults, but structured by them. So it's interesting to look and think about that. But let's transition to our next question, which is, when we hear that play is how a child learns, what exactly are they learning? And perhaps, Anne, you could start us off with that.
Well, I come from a background of believing that it's about the process and not the product. And I'm sure it stems from my own education. I come from a non-traditional background. And so it was how I innately taught when I taught early childhood and elementary age children. And again, I think that, I think what Aaron just, put in the chat, play should never end. I think as adults, we forget that, and absolutely throughout elementary, and I think even beyond. And so I think, I think that through play, they are learning. I mean, they are learning. And again, if I go back to the, the idea of taking nature walks, they learn about the life cycle by having a nature walk, by collecting the sticks, by bringing the pine cones back. And so I actually believe that play and process learning go hand in hand. It's not about the end product. And I hope I don't insult anyone when I say that, but I cringe when I walk into early childhood classrooms and I see, I shouldn't say this, but I see the finished product and they all look identical. Sorry, but.
Well, that's something we all need to work on and understand why. I mean, I remember that in my professional development and training at Cobleskill, at BOCES, everywhere, but it was drummed right into me. And yet I have colleagues who went to school at the same time as me, and somehow it wasn't part of what they integrated. So it's just an interesting thing for all of us to understand and start to talk about. But Suzanne, do you have any thoughts to add to that, or Penny?
Penny, why don't you go if you have something you want to add, and then I'll go after you.
I don't have something right off the bat.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, I wanted to kind of second what Anne just said about the process and not the product, which is related to art as well. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have to trust in the innate wisdom of children, and allow them to get on with it, sort of, you know what I'm saying here. So it's play is both doing and becoming. And it should be valued as such, as that, so yeah.
That's great to kind of reflect on it in that way. Well, let's kind of transition then to some of the skill building questions.
Can I just jump in one little thing? From my perspective, I always thought of play as the method of teaching and learning. Like it's a method, like sort of similar to what you're saying. This is the way we get to where we're going, through play. And especially with developmentally disabled children, like all different levels of it, they aren't going to be engaged in what I need them to learn if it's not play. If it's hard, if it's going to be hard for them to use their muscles, however, and they're not enjoying it, they're not going to engage. So you've got to develop play that way, as you spoke about.
Yes. And that's the part that's often so hard. Sometimes we can feel very lonely as we try and develop that or be part of it within a school setting. So we always hear that play builds foundational skills or that it supports social emotional learning. And yet sometimes we don't have the words to say that this is how play supports foundational skills. And perhaps we need people to give us the words or the research or something that backs us up. So Anne, you had said a little bit about that in our notes. Do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I go back, and I'm going back, decades ago when I taught in kindergarten class, and we had a beautiful, this was in a Title I school, a beautiful wooden sand table, and then another beautiful water table. And I tell my SUNY students this, I said, I don't remember necessarily teaching academic subjects in kindergarten. I do, and again, maybe it's because it was so long ago, but I do remember both the sand and the water table having measuring cups and gallons and quarts. And I'm not sure that I ever explicitly said, this is how many, and I'm sure that I did not say, this is how many quarts make up a gallon. I didn't do that. And yet I would say that those students got it. They understood the concepts. And in teaching math, we oftentimes are very procedural. We teach the procedures, we don't teach the concepts. And you can tell that because they're not transferable. So in other words, a child learns a skill, they learn a math skill, they're learning a procedure. But if you ask them how to use that in a given situation, when they cannot transfer it, it's kind of your indication that they have not understood the concept. And so I guess I look back and I think about all of those areas. The longer that I was in that school, the water table was removed, the sand table was removed. I had a dramatic play area, and children just created stores and family situations. That was removed. And it's almost like, is it the Joni Mitchell song where they put up a parking lot? I just heard that the other day. Again, it was a nostalgic kind of thing. But again, I think that was just so indicative of how play formed math, meaningful dialogue that Marie Nichols speaks of. And I'm not seeing it. And I'm out in the schools, and I'm not seeing it. And so I guess I would ask all of you who are in early childhood settings, why are we not seeing it? And can we get some of that back?
Suzanne, do you want to say anything, or Penny?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think ever since No Child Left Behind, when teachers were being held accountable for children's learning based on a standardized test score, we saw teachers teaching to the test. And I think that, but maybe it was even before then. And I think that that's when the dramatic play came out of a kindergarten classroom, or the water and sand table came out, because teachers at the other upper levels, the second grade teacher was telling the first grade teacher, your students better be prepared for this, right? I mean, it surprises me that kindergartners are learning sight words now. I was supervising an intern the other day, and very teacher-directed, smartboard was being used, children weren't talking to each other. They were copying down what the teacher was writing. It was almost like I was in a lecture hall, but there were 5-year-olds in front of me taking notes if they could, but so yeah, and I think part of the reason why that happened is and I don't know, you might disagree with me, but I think that a lot of people do not value early childhood teachers because they think we are just babysitters. It starts, with infants and toddlers and preschoolers. And so, you know, the trickle down happened. And a kindergarten teacher probably said to a preschool teacher, you better have your children ready to read by the time they get to kindergarten, you know, recently maybe. I mean, I've seen it evolve over time while I've been here at SUNY Cobleskill. So I think what we need to do is we have to articulate the benefits of play. As Anne, you were saying, we have to tell parents what children are learning when they have different measuring cups in the water table, when they're, you know, sifting sand through a funnel, when we have a clear plastic tube that a funnel can be connected to, and then water poured through to it, you know? I mean, the preschool teacher that we have working in the Effie Bennett Poe Child Development Center told me recently that a child told her at circle time, you don't really teach me anything. My mommy teaches me. And I can just imagine what that child was thinking. Because my mother had a workbook or a worksheet, right? That was what was equated with teaching. And I asked the teacher what she said, and she said, well, I was a little bit surprised by the comment. I didn't know how to respond to it. But she said, I think I just said, if you only knew, yeah. So
I think you're so right. I just saw the comment. I don't know, did somebody actually say that you're not allowed to use circle time? Somebody just, I know I'm not wearing my reading glasses.
Sometimes you can't call it circle time anymore in some settings. What's
Wow.
very interesting is, Penny, do you want to share something?
Yes. What I was going to say is that because of this very long time that I've been working, and my whole background is in development, like that's what, I'm almost as a scientist, that's how I was trained to do occupational therapy. And when I started working, they were teaching letter formation and handwriting in first grade. And then it got moved down to kindergarten, and that where they're teaching letter formation and handwriting. And now they're actually doing that in pre-K. A lot of kids come to school. And when you look at developmentally, like on one of the standard tests that I use to decide if a child has visual perceptual issues, it's the Berry Developmental Test of Visual Motor Integration. And it translates what you see with your eyes to what you can do with your hands. Standardized test, been around forever. And what's happened is that we are now asking children in school to do developmentally inappropriate activities, like your ability to tell the difference between the lowercase letter B and D. That skill, that visual perceptual skill, happens when you're 6. Can't change that. It's developmental. And so, but then we have all these kindergartners that are getting referred because they can't do this and they're getting referred for special education, rather, I should clarify. And when they get tested for special education, they don't qualify because those tests, those standardized tests, still are looking at what's developmentally appropriate. It's not developmentally appropriate to read in kindergarten. There are some kids that can, and some kids that do really well with that, but that's a continuum, and it's certainly not the norm. It's far from the norm. So now, and that's why play's gone, and that's why now we're trying to teach math skills to 5-year-olds, like having them add 2 + 3, and they don't know what 2 is. I mean, they don't know that 2 is actually 2 fingers, is what I mean, like they, let alone give meaning to that number 2. It's incredibly frustrating from my standpoint, like to have seen that.
Margaret, can I add something really, really quick? I was
Sure.
just going to bring us back to what Anne said about the water table and this sand table. But, children need those foundational skills. You were talking about that, Margaret. They need that that practical experience. You know, children, when they're in a bathtub and they've got bath toys and they've got measuring cups and all the things that I was mentioning before, they're learning about what can sink and what can float. When they're at the water table with a 1 cup and a 1/2 cup and a 1/4 cup, they might find out that 2 1/2 cups equal a 1 cup. The only way that they can do that worksheet and get the answer right is if they had that experience before they did the worksheet, you know, or maybe at the same time. But
So one of
they need the hands-on experience. They need to develop the concepts.
And you're
And then
absolutely
you-
right. And I think the testing, I just find myself shaking my head because again, I was in a first grade class pre-COVID observing a student, and the first graders were learning about nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And I said, I used to teach that when I taught 3rd grade. There was no way that they understood the concept of they memorized. And if you look at all the brain research, and James Zull wrote about this extensively, the only way, and this is for children and adults, the only way that long-term memory forms is when it is connected to something that they or we know and understand. And I usually add for young children that they're interested in. And I have yet to meet, I've met a lot of young children. I've yet to meet a young child who is fascinated about learning about a verb and that gets connected to something they know. So I don't know. I think the research is there. I just don't know why. It's been there. It's been there for years. It's just not, we're not making the connections. And
Well, and then along came core curriculum. I mean, that's where a lot of this is based from. You're in kindergarten and you're supposed to learn how to read those sight words. They took reading back to the 1950s. The core curriculum concept out of New York State is based on the reading that didn't work for me in the 50s. And it's like the Dick and Jane thing. It's so bad.
So one of the challenges that we all faced with Common Core and some other things has recently been addressed by New York State, because the Office of Early Learning and Education was not part of the books that came out from Pearson. Those books came out from Pearson and were distributed to schools, and they were very thick binders that pre-K teachers and others thought they had to get through. And yet when you would go to state ed, they would say, that's not from us. And I would say to them, well, in the schools I'm visiting where my students are, everybody's saying this is what you say has to be covered. And it's taken them a long while, I would say, but they have produced some videos that are on New York State AYC's website as a link, but also on State Ed's website as a link that really shows the early childhood classroom as we know it for children to be in, and a welcoming atmosphere for 1st and 2nd grade as well, which I never experienced in 1st and 2nd grade, but they show children moving around, being engaged in groups, focused on different projects, and time to play. In my short experience in a elementary school this fall, I would tell you that it was sort of not well received when I was thinking that perhaps children needed time to play. But that is what State Ed is saying should be happening in classrooms. And again, once again, teachers are worried that they're going to be measured. And even though state tests don't go in 1st and 2nd grade, that they're going to be measured by some type of performance as to how did these children do on some types of tests. So we've got a lot to do as far as things. And children need the social emotional support of play, but they also need, we as teachers need to know how to support children through that play. So how do we build their social emotional skills? What do we need to be looking at? Anne, do you want to start with that a little bit?
sure. I talked to my my teacher candidates about play that sometimes is just side by side that Vygotsky talks about, that children may not be having necessarily discussion, but that they're learning simply by even doing their independent play, but next to a peer. The importance of them collaborating. Again, I look at there's been a lot of studies on, even going back to the 60s, about how much time children get to speak in an early, and this goes actually from early childhood all the way through high school, as a matter of fact, but the amount of time, and people have logged this, John Goodlad did loggings, that it's dominated by the adult speaking, telling, directing, rather than the child expressing. And so I guess a lot of this is, asking children open-ended questions, or probing, tell me about, so if they're working with blocks or they're creating a collage, tell me about that, or how did that make you feel, or what if? And I think we need to do more of that rather than what is it?
And I think we have to remember that if you ask a probing question of a child who is somewhat reserved and quiet, they are going to say like that. But sometimes what I'll say to the students is ask a bunch of silly questions first, where they say no and go, no, you're so silly. And then say, well, what should we do? And then they'll come out with what should happen. But if you ask a question that the child thinks, okay, there's something I'm really supposed to know here. And, even if you ask me, what do I think? I'm not going to tell you, because they're nervous still, even in preschool.
I think it's a good point. I think it's also why we need to have teacher preparation programs that allow our teacher candidates to be silly and play, because sometimes they are the serious ones. So I think that's a great point. If you don't mind, I'm going to pass that on to them.
Yes. So anybody else want to share about social emotional thoughts? Okay, well, how about
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I'll jump in a quick one. The basis of inclusion, of including developmentally disabled, or however we're supposed to call it now, other children into a regular classroom, is because we discovered miraculously that children learn best from their peers. That's one of the ways that they're motivated to do the same thing that their peer is doing. So also, when you have all of that, when you have that play that might just be side by side play, they're looking at each other and learning from each other. And children, and that's such a huge part of the social emotional skills that they need, like getting information from what you see. Whoa, that guy's building the blocks sideways and I didn't know how to do that. I'm gonna try that one. That translates later into your ability to collaborate. I actually honestly had a pre-K teacher ask for all independent desks for her students instead of tables, because they were cheating off each other. Her words.
Yes, I walked into a few of those
It's
with some of the new standards.
And that's where that all came from. Yes. But we need to be together, just like we're learning from each other now. That's what kids do.
So that kind of brings us to this part about what do we as teachers need to do? And what should the teacher be doing when children are playing? I think we sometimes don't know what to do, because that wasn't always taught to us, especially if we find ourselves in an early childhood setting when we have an elementary training, when we have the older elementary training where perhaps we were in 3rd and 4th grade, and now suddenly we find ourselves in 1st or 2nd or even K and pre-K. We're not always aware. So Suzanne, do you have some thoughts for us?
I do.
So,
yes, I do. This all comes from a great book called Who Am I in the Lives of Children? It's by 3 authors, Stephanie Feeney, let me get the others, Eva Moravchik and Sherry Nolte, N-O-L-T-E. It's a great book. So those three authors talk about the adult role as, first of all, not being that we should be playing with children and be somewhat playful, but the children are the stars. We have a supporting role. We're not the stars. The children are the stars. So we want to limit our roles to actions and comments that extend and enrich the play. But then the three authors go on to describe how we could be observers, which is when we have structured periods of time where we record what we're seeing. We can even make a little chart using Piaget's play, right? So he had functional play, symbolic or constructive play, dramatic, so symbolic in the dramatic play area, symbolic, constructive, building things. And that last stage that Piaget had was games with rules, perfect for kindergartners, maybe older preschoolers. But then there's parton too. So we were talking about children playing side by side. That's called parallel playing. But before that comes solitary play, right? So we could be looking at all of this. We could also just be taking notes of what the children are saying to find out what they are interested in, and then use that information maybe to bring in materials from home or, you know, materials that we have at school. But being an observer, we can be a mediator and a protector. Being a mediator obviously is to be there when conflict occurs. Children learn valuable lessons in conflict resolution through their play. If they need our help, we should be there to help them. It's a great opportunity for us to teach conflict resolution skills. We want to support and sustain their play. We don't want to end it, you know? So the authors of this book give a really good example about children pretending to be birds and building a bird's nest, and they climb on top of a table. And the example that was given in the book was, don't just say, oh, that's dangerous, someone might fall. The authors say, let's, you know, I think the birds might need to move to a safer space. Can I help you move your bird's nest over to a different part of the room? So we enter their play. We're not going to stop it, right? We're there to support their play. What else? The protector is basically that fine line, maintaining a delicate balance between what supports the play and then, I don't know, and sustains the play. In other words, we don't want to have too much control over what they're doing. Again, the children are the stars of the play. We're the stage manager. We're going to provide the materials, right? We give them all the time that they need. What else? Participant, we can participate. It might help children's play last longer. They might learn new play behaviors if we participate. We were talking about the open-ended questions. Definitely that will help, I think. It builds a rapport with children. You know, we want to build a rapport with children. It's not a time for us to go have a coffee break and make a phone call or check our cell phone when they're playing. We need to be there watching. What else? There's also a tutor, being a tutor, as in tutoring children. There might be children who do not play very often, you know, and they might need help in entering play, or maybe play is not valued at home. So we can help them by saying things like, let's pretend to blank, you know, and kind of help the children play. So those are things that I can say about helping them to play, sustaining play.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I kind of think about with play as well is all of the ways that I was taught to think about play as far as joining it as well. And that when you navigate play with children who are playing with guns or other things, to look at that in a way that perhaps takes them away from the shooting of each other to taking care of each other or something, but not totally yelling at them for using a gun sometimes. Like, we can look at that in different ways and see what children can and can't navigate from. So that'll be interesting for our small discussions. Does anybody else want to add a little bit to what should the teacher be doing? Anne or?
The only thing I was going to add just very, very briefly is Suzanne mentioned taking notes, and I think anecdotal notes are great. We also talked about, I guess, educating parents. And so one of the things that I always like to do was take anecdotal notes and sometimes jot down verbatim what a child said. Always date, if they're working on something, date it, put a date on the note. I would then use those for parent conferences. And I tell my teacher candidates, it's a great way to actually have something concrete, because sometimes you just can't remember. So that was, I think that you were spot on with again, the taking of notes.
Okay.
And that whole briefly being able to just like interject a tiny bit of language to encourage them. We were saying facilitate it by like, who, if you're using little pretend figures, well, who are they? And what are they doing now? And, just to kind of, especially for the younger children that are developing that language, you can kind of be the narrator with a little bit of cues to help them like expand on their play, like what you were saying.
So if we transition a little bit into documentation and how could play be documented, we started that a little bit. And what should documentation of play look like so that when our administrators come and say, well, what are these children really learning and how do you know they're learning it? We've got a number of different means of doing that, but one of the most interesting things that I remember is back when I was teaching observation and assessment, I would say to the students, one of the hardest things to remember is that you have to plan to observe the same way you plan to teach. Your lesson, you have to have observation plans just the same way as you have lesson plans. And that's part of what you do. You have to have the forms there and ready. Otherwise, you'll just get lost in your daily routine of taking care of the children and think, oh gosh, what did happen today? So any thoughts about that? Penny, do you want to start a little bit and then we'll chime in?
Yes, actually, one of the things that I feel can work really well is if you, like back in the beginning when we were talking, I think of play as a modality, as a way of learning. And so one of the ways you can document it, learning through play, is actually take that skill that you're working on. Let's just say that you're working on sorting skills. So and the goal that you're going to have is that a child will be able to sort four colors by 4 objects by color, or maybe let's say, actually, if I showed you, that would be better. Anyway, so we're going to have this end goal, and then we develop games or play or like that kids do on their own. For example, one of the things that I use all the time are these dice. And I don't know if I can make you, well, I'm going to show them to you right there. There they are. Okay. There's 24 of them and there's 6 colors and they're tiny and kids love them. They'll do anything to play with them. So if you can use those, first, you can use them to stack. You can use them to sort by color. You can use them to make patterns. You can use them to learn the numbers that are on the dice. Like, I think you're trying to tell me I'm not sure. Yeah, so you dump these all out and you say, find all the ones that are ones. And I had class sets of these because to work to do therapy in the classroom, so my kids were included. And so, and all the kids liked it, you know, and then as they moved into higher grades, we would use the dice to do as a way to control one of their writing activities. For example, like I don't have the example in front of me, but finding ways that it's sort of a game, that children have the control over what's going to happen. So, but then go back to what it is that your learning standard is. If your learning standard is recognizing numbers, or your learning standard is making patterns, those A, B, B patterns, all those kinds of things, then I think the method of teaching them was this play. And I don't think that I wish that teachers could have more of that kind of way of learning, of teaching the children, rather than I don't know, in one of those silly little notebooks. No. So if we had more objects, more things to touch. And if you do that, then you're not measuring the play, you're measuring the outcome of the play. You can see that if I give this child this toy, these objects to play with, that they can accomplish the task I need, which is to develop those AB patterns. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. If we take a few moments to kind of transition to our other couple of questions, so that we will definitely have some time for smaller group discussion with participants who will be thinking through what we're saying and saying, oh my gosh. So we've got some professional resources that have been listed. Suzanne, you had some, and Anne shared some. Suzanne, do you want to start, and then Anne, you can also share your thoughts, and then Penny at the end?
Sure. So I'll just reiterate, it's the Alliance for Childhood. And that's a really, really good one, specifically about play. They even have something on their website about technology and children, that kind of play. I would also say the National Association for the Education of Young Children, they have a section for parents now, which is great. PBS Kids for parents. That's another great resource. And then the only other one I have is there's a US Play Coalition. So it's a global type partnership. But all really, really good. Yeah, and NACY's a great resource, Mary Jane. It's great. She's writing in the text about how she just joined.
So, Anne, did you want to share a little bit? You'd
Well,
found
I'm
some
gonna
other
be-
ones.
Yeah, I was going to be really brief. I've had found some really very clear and short and to the point articles on Edutopia. But I also, and I don't know how to get them to you, I think I sent them to you, but there were some short videos. Most of what I have is really based on play-based education in Finland. And there's some wonderful, I've been approved 3 times. I'll put in a little plug. I've been approved 3 times to take a group of education students to Finland. And each time COVID has nixed our plans. So I just put it in again because our fingers are crossed.
I want to go.
Please join us
afterwards. You can take professionals there too, can't you? So
I don't know, but we can work it out. But I also want to go back real quickly to documentation when you said about administrators. What about having an evening where the administrators, I guess I say this because when I taught in kindergarten and 1st grade, I did not always have administrators who were well-versed in early childhood education. Why not have a night for parents and administrators where they actually engage in blocks and puzzles and understand the relationship between math and spatial relations? I think a hands-on rather than a lecture. So that would just be my little plug.
and why the blocks are out in certain ways and not just dumped in a box. You know, why they're put
Yes.
away in order with shapes and things like that. We do have the links, and Aaron is going to try and put them on in the chat because he and I talked about that. So we'll see if he can get that into the chat at some point.
Put the links in the chat.
Oh, he's got them in the chat already. So the links that Anne, you shared are in the chat. If anybody
Thank
wants.
you. Thank you, Erin.
The video link ones?
I said, let me know if you want to play the video.
No, I guess we'll kind of transition so that we have enough time for people to say their thoughts. We've got some ideas for wondering about parents, because sometimes we're finding that parents don't necessarily know how to play with their children or feel that it's valuable, that they should really be working on different workbooks that you buy from the store or different programs that you can get so that your children are ready instead of allowing them to play and being part of their play. So any thoughts about that, Suzanne? That was something you really wanted to share and start, and we
Sure.
could build
Well,
on.
yep, I was going to mention Anne's idea. I think that's a really, really great idea. Plan a play night. Maybe even have some of those administrators come when the families are there. And, you know, and not only play, but then reflect on the value of that play. You know, and talk about what children are learning through that play. You can create a documentation panel too of photographs of children playing. And underneath the photographs have captions about what is happening, put quotation marks possibly, that the children, you know, quotes from the children. That might help families understand the purpose and the value of play. Let's see, there's different types of play. So maybe in a newsletter that goes home to parents, we can highlight a type of play. So, you know, there's rules-based play that I think is common in elementary school. There's make-believe play, there's construction play, there's sensory play, language play, risk-taking play, outdoor play, so many different types of play that we can highlight and, you know, help parents and families understand their value. I don't know, you know how some schools have a preschool backpack program that focuses on literacy? Maybe
Yes.
maybe something similar related to play. In that backpack are objects to play with, kind of like what you were just showing us, Penny, you know, with simple instructions and with an explanation about the worth of that activity and how it's enhancing the development of the child.
That would be a super great idea. Instead, I mean, part of the reason why I think parents don't value play, especially once their kids get to school, is because they get homework. And I mean, I have like a lot of different feelings about that. But my 5-year-old granddaughter comes home with homework. And along with that, she's supposed to read for 20 minutes. But nobody asked her to play, you know, and I would love that. I mean, it's not bothering her, you know, but that's different. Like she's an unusual child in some regards. Like lots of kids, after they've been in school all day, they should go outside. They should go outside for as long as they can and run it off, you know, because we're making them sit so long. But yes, a backpack play at home thing would be great. That would be a wonderful idea. I might even see if I can dream some of that up.
You know what, Margaret, I just want to say really quickly, I think that in these somewhat pandemic times still, that, you know, what we're talking about is even more important, you know, because of what children have been through. So it's all the more important. So I'm glad we're talking about this now.
It's been interesting to look at the children who are in the primary years right now, because if you think about a child who's in second grade, this is the first year that they've been in school all year, all day. When they were in kindergarten, they left in March. And that was probably around the time that they were just kind of coming together as a group and really getting to understand this is the real deal. And then first grade happened where some of the children were out the whole year. Other children were in and out throughout the year. Some didn't start until December. Each school was different. And now we have children in second grade who really haven't had that time together as a team and a group and know each other as well. And know and understand the different parts of their school the same way that they may have if they were there all year for 2 years. So we've got a lot of challenges that teachers are facing, as well as a mixed message about what's developmentally appropriate practice and play. And in child-centered learning versus teacher-directed learning, and what does state ed say and why and how does all of that happen? So Erin, are we almost ready to be in our groups?
I've had the breakout rooms ready. We're gonna do 4 of them, and then you don't have to leave.
Okay. We're gonna do 4 breakout rooms? Okay, and then different people will be different facilitators on each breakout? Can you tell us who our facilitators are?
So in room 1 will be Penny Cypress.
Okay,
Room 2 will be you.
okay,
In room 3 will be Dr. Hayslip.
okay,
And room 4 will be Dr. Fine.
okay. So when we have our small groups, what we were hoping was that you would get to talk with the presenters and get to kind of say some things that you thought were interesting, what you might question, what you think might be difficult in your settings. And then what should we, as people who have been trying to organize the Week of the Young Child, and that has been Julie, Sharon, myself, and Erin, what should we be trying for next year, as well as what should we be pushing for from the Teacher Center, from BOCES, and from our local chapter of AEYC to present for people in this type of format or a hands-on format? I think most people really enjoy the fact that they can be home at night and talk about this, but also sometimes people really do need to come together and play. So we'll put ourselves in different groups and we'll see how we're doing. And I'm kind of looking forward to hearing what people think. We wanted to just have a moment to know what each group talked about a little bit. And then we have our wonderful cup with everyone's name in it for the prizes. So that being said, I'll share what we did in our little group. And I had Sharon and Erica with me. We talked about that one of the most important pieces of the next step would be for us to talk and have workshops on parent involvement and parent engagement, and maybe even offer some hands-on opportunities to parents as well as to teachers and others. We really wanted to have the opportunity to have some in-depth discussions about the use of guns and military families in play, and learning about how to embrace family culture if we are with hunters and others who have families who are deployed, and how does that child represent what their families are doing? If we are in this no gun play sort of school environment, but maybe we all need to think about that. We want to talk a little bit about how the internet is affecting education and the good things of it as well as the challenging things, and the importance of activity kits that are truly focused on play, not on a product, not on a step-by-step way of working with children. I was just looking at some for my grandchildren, and they were all these cutesy little follow the steps sort of things that I didn't expect from Magnolia or things. I really thought they were going to be open-ended and free, but indeed they're not. So it may be up to us. And that was something that Sharon reminded us that we had done last year for Shenango County for the Week of the Young Child, was created open-ended curriculum types of activities for the Week of the Young Child. So that's our report. Suzanne, you want to go with yours, or someone from your group share what you did?
Sure, basically, I had Nikki and Sandra, and they introduced themselves and told me what they were doing. And we just talked about the issue of play not being valued and what we can do about it. And I mentioned the word revolution, that we need to have an early childhood revolution, and that the curriculum needs to just flip. Teachers need to observe and focus on what children are saying and doing and playing, find out what their interests are, and somehow create language, arts activities, and science and math activities related on that. And it's got to be hands-on. We can still look at the standards and see what applies.
Okay, thank you. Penny, did you have anything?
And I had Amy and Mary Jane, and we had two different ends of the spectrum, pre-K and then secondary education. And Amy expressed wanting to learn more about using how you can use language and play in creative sense in the secondary setting more, especially since we've had all this COVID, and then moving back to down there in pre-K. Amy is a new classroom teacher at that grade level and has a curriculum that she has to use, and believe me, she does, and just not being like needing help to look at curriculums and come up with ways to put play, to make there be play that goes with what the curriculum says.
It's interesting. Yeah, the state ed website will be a great resource for that, because it truly says this is what you do, and some of the other publications that the state has put out, but you don't always think they're there. So Penny, anything else you want to say?
Nope.
Okay. And then who have we got left? Anne?
Yes, so Nancy and Julie and I were talking about a number of things, but we were talking about the ability of young children to clean up. You know, we started, Nancy was asking at what age, and we all agreed that a 2-year-old is quite capable. Julie had great ideas about making it into a game so that they can clean up. We talked about the impact of masks and taking the masks off and how children reacted just emotionally upon seeing people. Even the young ones, and we said even some of the older ones that Julie's been working with. And we were just starting to get into another topic, and time was up, so we'll have to add to their session.
Erin was there. So we've got a lot to build from, and we really want to thank you. Erin, there is an evaluation someplace linked to this, right? That you want to make sure we fill out. So is the evaluation on where they registered from?
I'm gonna put a link in.
On your link, there's an evaluation, I hope.
I'm gonna put a link into.
Oh, he's putting a link into the chat. So this is the trusty pink cup at the moment. And all of our names are, all of your names are in there. And we will start with the literature, the printed materials. So printed materials are going to Mary Jane. Mary Jane, if you can make sure that you send us your email and
Awesome.
this, if you want to share the school where you are, or your address, we can get the printed materials from New York AEYC to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's exciting. I never
Okay.
win.
So now coming out, Dr. Ann, would you like a an NAEYC membership?
Oh, I'd love it. Thank you.
Okay, so you've got a membership for a year,
Thank you.
and this is the person
Can we
who's-
trade? I just paid $70 to join the NAEYC. What?
So here we go. Well, you're probably gonna get about $70 worth of books, so it'll be okay.
There. All right. I'll take it.
And here we go. Penny, you have the conference registration. Penny, is that something you want to do?
This is gonna sound terrible, but what conference?
It's the New York AEYC conference.
You know what? That is, I want that to go to somebody that's gonna go and will really enjoy it, because it's not what I'm gonna do. Yep, Mary Jane's getting it.
Oh, Mary Jane? Okay, Mary Jane, you want
Is
the
that okay
conference?
if I decide to do that?
Okay, so then we're going back to someone getting the books. Erica, the books are now yours. Okay?
All
So
right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I have to get my little NAEYC, because if I don't put it on your names, I'll get the papers mixed up. And Mary Jane, you're the conference. Okay, thank you so much. And please take some time to fill out the evaluation. Thank you for your flexibility as we learn to deal with our challenges with technology, but we made it work, and I'm so thankful for all of your interest and support of play. And again, if you want some of the CTLC hours, please let us know. Okay, Erin, did I remember everything?
Got it.
Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Hi. Let's see here. All right.
thank you, Anne and
Thank you.
Suzanne. And Penny, this was perfect. I hope you felt comfortable.
I got
Okay.
comfortable. No, I
Yeah.
did. I didn't start out that way, but thank you.
You know, it's been one heck of a week, but we got there. And I think we did what we really needed to do. We got people to talk about play.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. I'm gonna
Thank you.
sign
Thank
off.
you.
Okay, thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have
so-
a good night.
Okay.